Chapter 24. No grandiose temples have ever been erected on the face of the earth in which to worship the great Pan. His worship has more traditionally taken place in the earth's natural settings, such as mossy caverns and grottos, where both shepherds and outcasts alike have been known to find welcome respite. And so it was that Christy O'Keepe found the natural setting of the spring-fed lake to be enormously to his liking. Having driven Elspeth, Gwen, and Peter to Natalie's memorial service in the yellow VW Westphalia, he had dropped them off at the courtyard and then waited in the parking lot for the crowd to thin out before proceeding there himself, to write his own wish upon a small piece of paper and launch it in a candle boat onto the lake. All worship should take place in nature, Christy had concluded long ago, with the entirety of God's flora and fauna in attendance. It was during his turn to walk around the lake, even as he had admired perhaps 100 tiny candle boats twinkling on the water's calm surface, that Christy sensed a shadowy presence with large incandescent eyes following him closely from the safety of the nasturtiums growing wild along the path's steep embankment. Upon reaching the courtyard, the creature emerged from the entanglement, only to reveal itself to have been a little black cat. Artfully, the feline had run deliberately across the courtyard and threaded its way skillfully through the milling crowd, who drank chai and spoke in hushed tones of Natalie. Upon reaching a signpost that read "The Sunken Garden," however, the cat stopped short. Turning back as if to make sure that Christy was following, the lithe creature then disappeared down the appointed way. Christy lost no time in agilely skirting around the periphery of the funeral guests, only too happy to be led away to some hopefully more solitary place in which he too could remember the charming young woman he had once known as Natalie. When he descended into the pleasing grotto-like environs of the sunken garden, however, he was more than a little surprised to find an oddly transparent figure already there, seated upon a stone bench with an outlandish-sized black dog curled up at its feet. Christy could not help but notice that the filmy being was barefoot and clad in a luminescent yellow sari. "What in tarnation?" Christy mumbled under his breath as he rubbed his eyes in disbelief before going on to whisper raspily, "Natalie? Is that you? Is that Byron you got with you?" "Christy!" the figure exclaimed in genuine alarm. "You scared me to death." Laughing at herself and her own involuntary pun, she nevertheless quickly regained her composure and uttered in commensurate disbelief, "What are you doing here?" "Well now, darling, I could very well ask you the same thing, couldn't I?" Christy countered politely, not wanting to have so rudely pointed out the obvious. Natalie, having no such qualms herself, boldly came right out and said it. "This is my funeral, may I remind you? I belong here. But you, how could you have possibly known?" "You might not believe me if I said a little bird told me." Christy sighed wearily. "So I'm just going to get right to the point. Remember that photograph you run off with when you and the baby left Big Sur?" Natalie was heard to gasp audibly at the photograph's mention. "Yep, I'm afraid your chickens have finally come home to roost. That boy's done found it, and it's making him real sick. He's in the hospital right now, and you gotta do something to help him, darling. You gotta tell that boy the truth." Christy stated as pragmatically as possible under the circumstances. But what you're saying is that he's found the photograph, Natalie murmured methodically, almost to herself, not unlike Hercule Poirot mentally reconstructing a crime scene. Wouldn't that seem to imply that he already knows the truth? Not at all, darling. He may know the truth, Christy explained patiently, but that don't mean he can believe it. That won't happen till he hears it from the horse's mouth. In that case, shouldn't you really be talking to Zuzu? Natalie said indelicately, even as Lord Byron at last raised his regal head to acknowledge the presence of his long estranged master. Subsequently, the dog lifted his massive girth from off the ground and lumbered nobly over to where Christy was sitting. The Newfoundland then took a seat directly facing Christy, and now at eye level placed what once would have been a heavy paw upon his master's knee. To Christy's astonishment, the paw had neither weight nor substance. When Christy then produced a milk bone from the inside pocket of his tweed waistcoat, Lord Byron whimpered and thumped his tail in appreciation, but made no effort to even attempt to eat it. Seeming to understand the dog's odd dilemma, Christy kindly returned his attention to the rather sensitive question that Natalie had raised only a few moments earlier. Having always considered Lord Byron to have been an excellent judge of character, it seemed only natural to consult with the dog as he sat at attention directly in front of Christy. Looking Lord Byron point blank in the eye, Christy began. Byron, the two of us, we know Zuzu pretty well, don't we? The mere mention of Zuzu's name was met with resumed whimperings and tail thumps on Lord Byron's part. In his excitement, the dog had even begun to drool excessively, but not unlike the paw before it, it had no actual substance. It was, however, the most touching means that Byron had at his disposal by which to express his deep affection, and its implication as such was not lost on Christy. After all, Christy could not help but remember that once upon a time in Big Sur, Lord Byron had saved Zuzu's life and the life of her unborn baby, that he had steadfastly watched over them in the goat house and protected them from all harm, and that he had remained loyal and devoted to them, even it now seemed, from beyond the grave. Yes, I know, Byron. Zuzu's got her strengths, Christy crooned soothingly in an attempt to calm the agitated dog. But like us all, he continued, and not without obvious misgivings, she's got her weaknesses too. Turning to Natalie, he then said, Zuzu's a coward, Nat. She ain't never going to tell the boy the truth. It's up to us, and I've already tried. Now it's your turn, darling. But Christy, Natalie replied with growing distress as she tried desperately once again to point out the obvious. I'm dead. And before Christy could supply a no doubt handy answer, they were interrupted by the sound of breathless footsteps running urgently down the path and the voice of a child shouting wildly, Natalie, come quickly. Jean-Noel is here.